Hey, what's up everybody? It is Kellen here from Start Your Systems and welcome back to MXGP Pro, where today we're going to be playing a little bit of the Pangkal Penang track in MXGP Pro, the Indonesian Grand Prix from 2017, as we recap the 2019 Grand Prix of Indonesia that just happened over the weekend at Palembang, so a different track, but as Pangkal Penang and Palembang were both basically just built in parking lots, and the tracks actually are pretty similar. I figured it would be fine to do this for a video today. So not exactly the same track, but it is still the Indonesian Grand Prix, and we're still going to talk about it. Decided to play as Adam Sterry in this video, and he was on the Monster Energy DRT Kawasaki team back when MXGP Pro was made for the 2017 season. Now he rides for the FNH Kawasaki team, and I chose to ride as him today because, well, I haven't really made a video recapping many of the GPs lately, so there's a couple things I wanted to hit that don't necessarily relate to Indonesia, but I'll save those thoughts and opinions for the end of the video, and hopefully we'll get to those rather quickly, because not a ton happened in Indonesia. A lot of stuff has been happening outside of the actual racetrack, I would say, that's like more newsworthy, noteworthy, I guess. But just to the Indonesian Grand Prix real quick, we'll start off by talking about the MXGP class on the weekend, and kind of the two races that weren't. You really, like with, so part of the reason that like there's more to talk about off the racetrack is that Antonio Cairoli has now been deemed out for the remainder of the 2019 season. Last time I did a video when we were recapping Kegums, there's been, the German Grand Prix at Teutschenthal in between this, but the Kegums Grand Prix, Cairoli crashed, dislocated his shoulder. Initial thought was maybe he just has to skip Germany, but he'll come back. Then it was found out he was going to have to skip the two Indonesian rounds, the flyaway races that they're on right now. And eventually this coming week, or like this week, it just came out that, Antonio Cairoli is out for the season, had season-ending shoulder surgery to repair some ligament damage that he sustained in that crash that damaged his shoulder at Kegums, and thus his chance at winning his 10th world title, at least for this year, has come to a close, and it's really opened up an opportunity now for Tim Geiser to pretty much walk this thing home. With no Cairoli, he's got over 120 point lead in the World Championship, a lead that actually just got bigger over the weekend, but you thought that maybe he'd just go 1-1 in Indonesia and it would be pretty easy at Palembang. He did not go 1-1, but it really wasn't just because, he got flat out beat or is a great race or anything. He got both hole shots. He won the first moto, got the hole shot in the second one, had a decent little lead going, and then crashed all by himself. Not really a big one. Normally Geiser likes to have those big ones. This one that he had was not a big one. It's just a weird little like off-track thing that he did, and when he tried to correct himself and get back on the track, he slid out and ended up facing the wrong direction. That's when Romain Febvre slid on by and took the lead, and he got out to about an 8-second lead at one point, and was pretty much set to just go ahead and cruise away with this thing. But Geiser reeled it back down. He got it down to within a couple seconds by the end of it, but still it was Febvre's first race victory since back in 2017. That's how crazy it's been for Febvre, and we talked about Geiser winning his first GP since 2017 at the beginning of the year. Now Febvre finally has a race victory. He did not win the overall though, however, because he went fourth in the first moto. There's a weird freight train in that first moto with a lot of guys mixed together. Tonus trying to get to Febvre, C were battling it out. Anstey was in second and like charging his way trying to get to Geiser, but none of them could, and they were all so close together, but nothing really seemed like it was happening. As a really kind of a one-line track. It had rained a lot in Indonesia, and like the rain was coming on and off throughout the day as well, so it really kind of knuckled down the track into some pretty one-line stuff, and thus made the the actual on-track product maybe not as like good. It kept the racing close because everybody could do the same things, but the passing was pretty tough unless you forced the issue, and oftentimes forcing the issue led to more mistakes and everybody would lose time on each other, so not a lot of passing happened. But Geiser did win the GP. He did extend his points lead. He has got a gigantic points lead as mentioned, and I mean he is going to probably walk this thing home now unless he has a big off or a big crash of some sort. Kind of hoping that Cairoli could have come back and made it a little bit more interesting. Obviously, the giant wild card is still Jeffrey Hurlings, who is dealing with his broken ankle. When he'll be back, as the last race he raced in, he obviously won the opening round or opening moto at Kegums in Latvia. So no immediate timetable on Hurlings' return. They're hoping maybe after the Indonesian swing he can be able to get back onto some weight-bearing loads on his foot and try out to go after the Locket Grand Prix in the Czech Republic, but pretty unlikely given that he's not really fighting for anything. There's not any supreme benefit to him coming back to the series early. I think in his case, and in Glenn Coldenhoff's case, and in Brian Boger's case, and in Calvin Vallandren's case, since none of them are going for world titles, they're all just hoping that they stay healthy and get selected for the Netherlands team to go to the Motocross of Nations on home soil and probably win it, because yeah, it's going to be a sand track. It's going to be pretty easy, I think, for them to win it at the end of the day. But back to Indonesia. I mean, you know, it's guys' championship to lose. Everybody else is kind of shuffling for positions behind. Seems like, you know, it's either Fevre, Sewer, or Tonis that you could peg as like the next, you know, best guy in that group. Max Anstey probably was the second best rider on the day in Palembang, but crashed early on in the second moto, and it put him way back. He charged all the way up to 6. Is a really good charge for him, but yeah, the early disadvantage really set him back pretty far. And you know, going second in the first moto, he looks like he's kind of catching his swing. Coldenhoff also getting into the mix as well. So a lot of guys had some positive races. I think Brian Bogers also is one that had a good round. I think he finished 8th overall. So a lot of positives, obviously, with the field pretty depleted, with like Desal out, Cairoli out, Hurlings out. A lot of these guys are kind of stepping up to the plate a little bit more now, which is good to see. But I think the battle for second in the championship is really the one to watch as we get down into the second half of the season, because, you know, Sewer has looked really good. He's hit the podium a couple times here recently. Tonis's 5 podium streak was snapped after he had a DNF in the second moto. He had a technical issue with the bike, and it just fried out basically. Wasn't able to finish the race, so that was a bit of a disappointment for him. But he's still riding the mix in that championship hunt with Paulan and Seward going for second in the championship, and I think all those guys would love to be second in the championship. Hearing a lot of rumors about you know, Yamaha downsizing and taking the Wilvo team out and going to just a factory effort with only 2 riders next year, and there's obviously 4 of those Yamaha guys that would go for those 2 spots. So what happens there, we don't really know, but yeah, we'll have to wait and see. On to the MX2 class, where there's a little bit more, I would say, parity than was kind of expected this weekend as well, with Jorge Prado having such a, I don't know, like dominant time right now. It seemed like he wasn't going to be able to just get flat out beat at this Grand Prix. But the first moto, he definitely looked very beatable. His teammate Tom Vial just stuck with him for the first 15 minutes or so of the moto. And then Prado crashed and, you know, turned on the afterburners late into the moto to catch back up to Vial and pass him. It's a very hot day, about 35 degrees Celsius, so around that 100-degree mark Fahrenheit. And obviously humidity with the monsoon season coming through Indonesia right now is very high. So guys are getting a little bit more fatigued than usual, and I think Vial suffered from that pretty bad late in the first moto. But Prado was actually pretty gassed after the first moto, and it was pretty obvious that he maybe wasn't going to be as set to go for the second moto as he probably would have hoped. And it kind of, I think, showed early in that second moto, and once he got into a groove and settled down, things came to him a little bit smoother, I would say. But he started up front. He almost got the whole shot, but just lost out in the end to... was it Geertz that grabbed the whole shot that time? Or maybe him and Vial were going at it. I think maybe Vial actually got the whole shot, but Geertz went to the lead pretty quickly. So Iago Geertz led. Thomas Kjærulsen fought his way up to second. Vial moved up to third. Prado drifted back to fourth and eventually drifted back to fifth for a quick moment as Brian Moreau was able to pass him, but Prado got around him. And then the top 4 kind of took off together. And they basically were just running within a second and a half of each other for the first 15 to 20 or so minutes. Geert started opening up a small gap. He looked comfortable. He looked smooth. He looked in control. then just a really light front end tuck on the exit of a corner in the back section of the racetrack caused him to tip over. And he'd actually had a pretty big crash in the first race that was a bit of a lingering effect on him in the second race, where he had a bruised rib and was just having trouble with strength in his torso, upper midsection. So that could have been a contributing factor to tipping over the way he did. But either way, totally blew a chance at winning the race. He wouldn't have won the overall because he had a bad first moto, obviously. But he probably should have won that second moto. Instead, he goes down. Olsen moves up into the lead. Then Prado late once again catches and passes his teammate Vial to go into second. He was going to win the GP either way, whether he stayed behind Vial or not, but he went 1-2, won the GP. And I think it was Olsen that got up into second. Oh, no, it was Vial. That's right. Vial was second because of the 2-3. And then Olsen went 6-1 or 7-1, I think, for the third overall spot on the podium. And yeah, that was kind of it there at Palembang. I mean, that was just how it went down in the MX2 class. A little bit more dramatic racing because of the crashing and some of the fatigue the guys are experiencing. But I'll tell you what, man, these tracks are boring. They're so boring. And, the 2020 GP schedule just got released today. There's no British Grand Prix, and there's a lot of fuss about that as Matterley Basin goes off the schedule now. But they're going to have 3 Asian rounds. There's going to be an Asian Grand Prix, which is going to be the second Indonesian round, just like they're doing this year. But they're also going to go to China, which I believe will be built in a parking lot as well. And they already go to Frauenfeld in Switzerland, which is basically a parking lot. I'm just not a big fan of these tracks. Like, I never was a huge fan of Qatar. It was cool that they went to the Middle East and they raced at the night. But it's not really motocrossy to me. Like, I want hills. I want off cambers and challenging sections instead of basically just super motocross, which is what these parking lot tracks are. So I don't mind it so much that they go to Indonesia and experience that market and get into the Asian market a little bit. I like that aspect of it for sure, but I wish that there was an opportunity for them to go to better tracks if they choose not to go to a place like Matterley Basin, which is obviously a pretty good track. So that sucks a little bit. That's probably like my big takeaway from Indonesia this past weekend, and now they're going to the Grand Prix of Asia this next weekend at Semarang, which they did last year, and we'll see how it goes there. But yeah, some of the big news again that I wanted to talk about, I'll save Steri for the end because that's kind of like was the biggest talking point leaving Germany was Steri and his teammate Jacoby. But so yeah, with Cairoli out for the season, changes the dynamic up for Red Bull KTM. But the huge news that really dropped heavy on us right before the Indonesian Grand Prix, the week coming up to the Indonesian Grand Prix, was Jorge Prado has signed a 4-year contract extension with Cairoli KTM to stay in Europe and race the MXGP class when he is forced to move out of the Mx2 class after winning the world title this year, which seems pretty likely. Either way, in a post-race interview that he did with Lewis Phillips of MX Vice, he basically said, even if he doesn't win the title, it's pretty likely he goes to the 450 class next year anyway, as there is a reason for signing that contract, and I would have to assume that that reason is he is set to become Cairoli's replacement. I wouldn't put it past it that next year is Antonio Cairoli's last season racing. He'll groom Prado to take over that Cairoli effort for the following 3 years and challenge Jeffrey Hurlings for world championships and Tim Geiser for world championships and so on and so forth. But it does kind of, I don't know if I want to say that it sucks, but I was really actually hoping to potentially see Prado go to the USA, spend at least a couple years here. If he went back, I would have been totally fine with it, but he's still only 18 years old right now. He's going to be 19 when he goes to the 450 class. The same way that I felt like it would be really cool if Geiser came to the USA, even if it was just for a couple years. I felt the same way about Prado, and we all know that TLD KTM definitely could have used him in the United States. They've had a tough go of it lately, and Prado's pretty good at Supercross, and I really just would have liked to see him indoors 1 year just to see. We're not going to get that chance, or at least we won't get it for the next 4 or 5 years, because he is committed to staying in the GP scene for the foreseeable future. Judging by the interview that he did with Lewis Phillips, as mentioned, it sounded like that was kind of always in the works. They never really brought up the USA, which was weird because that was basically his heart set and goal back in 2016 when he tested out here and trained with TLD KTM. But as it works out, he's not coming. And yeah, maybe a bit of a bummer for us American fans, but I'm actually excited GP-wise that that's going to work out because, you know, with Cairoli likely on his last leg of his career here pretty soon, he's going to be 34 next year. It's nice to see that there would be someone speed-wise that probably could, you know, kind of replace him as a guy to challenge a Hurlings or a Geyser in this championship, because both of those guys have plenty of potential to make these things boring if either one of them are healthy for an extended period of time. But Cairoli always knew how to get kind of into their heads and really ruffle some feathers. So maybe Prado can kind of assume that role once Cairoli does end up retiring. So yeah, Prado stays in Europe. Discuss the Indonesian Grand Prix and the upcoming Grand Prix of Asia at Semarang. Let's talk about Jacoby and Adam Sterry, whom I am riding as, and kind of the big drama back from Germany. If you didn't watch it, I would highly recommend typing in Henry Jacoby, Adam Sterry, Teutschental, or Henry Jacoby, Adam Sterry, Germany. Very, very interesting. Not, you know, like that it would have been a lot different if they weren't teammates, but because they're teammates, this whole situation got really exacerbated and became kind of an issue for the F&H guys, and I'm kind of surprised that they haven't really said anything very publicly about the situation yet, and Sterry himself has basically quieted down any conversation. But what happened was Henry Jacoby, it's his home Grand Prix in Germany, gets a bad start in the second moto. He was third in the first one. He wants to be on the podium at his home Grand Prix, charging through the field, kind of gets into a little bit of a stall behind his teammate Adam Sterry as they battle for ninth. They go back and forth for several laps. Finally, Jacoby gets the pass done, or at least kind of got the pass done. Sterry was about to fight back alongside of him coming down the mechanics area, and Jacoby looked over and turned left down a straightaway. Just came right across the racetrack and just absolutely took out his own teammate. Just went right across the front wheel and kept going to the point where he almost went completely off the racetrack and took Sterry down. Sterry flipped off the racetrack, got back up immediately, so fortunately he wasn't hurt, but obviously very frustrated, got back up and didn't look at Jacoby. He actually looked at the mechanics area and shook his arms as like, what the heck? Why did my own teammate just do that to me? I understand, you know, that he was trying to pass me and maybe he was frustrated, but it's his teammate. Like, the last thing you want to do is take out your teammate on purpose, and he did it like blatantly, obviously, as like one of the most blatant takeout maneuvers I'd ever seen. So that in itself was a bit of a problem, and you know, you could say that there would have been some drama back at the rig if just that happened. Maybe they would have been able to talk about it and, you know, cooler heads prevailed, etc., etc. Oh no, we weren't done, ladies and gentlemen. After the race, Jacoby's rolling up to one of the big tall singles in the middle of the track to salute the home fans, and the fans, you know, obviously are just applauding him for being one of the hometown or home race hero type of guys. Sterry rolls up alongside of him. Obviously helmets are on, so we can't read lips and see what was said, but I would imagine it was something to the effect of like, dude, WTF, why did you just take me out in the middle of a straightaway? We're teammates, why would you do that? Jacoby kind of does it, you know, says something back. Sterry says, no, that's like BS, I would assume, and kind of gets closer to Jacoby in his face, and you see Jacoby like lean back and then punch Sterry in the helmet, which never ever will I understand why riders think that that's going to do anything but hurt your own hand. I digress. Now we have a problem. We have a rider that went out of his way to clean out his own teammate, and then in a discussion afterwards, punches the same teammate that he just took out. Now, Jacoby has kind of always been known as a bit of a loose cannon and somewhat of a hothead, so this isn't like completely out of the norm of what he could or potentially would do for his typical behavior. But I'm kind of surprised that nothing really came of this. There wasn't any, you know, obvious penalty given out by MXGP to the effect of like sitting out a round or you know, disqualification or anything like that. I believe he was fined for the punch, and then nothing seemingly was done by his team, you know, the team, to stifle the situation. It was all very weird the way it went down, and I'm still kind of surprised that we haven't heard more backlash from this. Jacoby, who is going to be out of the class next year anyway, as he will age out of the class. probably is kind of fighting for his career at this point because he's trying to earn an MXGP class ride, but pretty unlikely he will end up with one, as he's not like a, you know, wide open favorite at the front of the field every week in the MX2 class to warrant you believing that he deserves an MXGP ride. So very weird situation. I just figured I'd touch on it. My opinion of it is that I really do feel, as dirty as those two situations were, that maybe even a disqualification would have been warranted for Jacoby there. You can't have that stuff in racing. I get hard racing, I get takeouts, I understand that. And if it was just the crossing the track on purpose to take his teammate out, yeah, maybe you slap him with a fine and say you're on probation or whatever. But then after the race, to get into, you know, a verbal and then physical altercation with his teammate and throw hands, I think you gotta have to sit him down for a round after that, in my opinion. You just can't have that kind of stuff on the racetrack. You know, if they want to get into an altercation and start throwing hands in the rig afterwards, I get it, but it was on television. A lot of kids in Germany that maybe look up to Jacoby, not saying that a lot do or whatever, but maybe you do, and you just saw your favorite rider do something pretty terrible to his teammate and then punch him afterwards for pretty unwarranted reasons. So yeah, I honestly believe he should have at least been disqualified from the German Grand Prix, and was kind of surprised to see that he wasn't sat for a round from either his team or the MXGP officials. But I digress. Maybe you know, something is still to come. We'll have to wait and see if anything happens. But very weird situation indeed. All right, that is the lot and all the conversation that I can give you guys today about the current MXGP scene. The MXGP of Indonesia has come and gone. And stay tuned this week. I'm going to have a couple of like quick announcements about the MXGP series coming up. Some cool things that I want to share with you guys here pretty soon. And yeah, keep an eye out on the channel. As always, really appreciate you guys watching all the videos that you do. And hope to see you guys in all of our future ones that I make on the channel as well. So Kellen here from Start Your Systems, signing out. So long for now.